What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Build It with Tim, where I take your user suggestions and build out cool apps and features and anything that you might like to see built, and I'll build it live and on the fly. Today is a pretty interesting one. Actually, I'm pretty excited about this. This is, well, the title probably doesn't do it justice. How to restrict pages from the live app. What we're really doing here is we're building out a system in which from the live application, rather than the builder, from the live application, we can restrict access to pages by um, page status. Okay, and that's going to make more sense when we get into here and into the builder and take a look. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this by using page rules, pipes, and record IDs. I just want to make you familiar with record IDs in this video, so we're going to be talking about that a little bit. Okay, so as usual, I'm going to show you what this looks like when we're done, and then I'll jump into the builder. Okay, so here's the finished product. There's really not a whole lot to show other than we have a list of our pages and page statuses. And if I try to visit a page that is currently marked as inactive, then we have this page rule that's going to tell us that the page is inactive. And I can go back to the page security and I can change this to active. And now I can visit the page. All right, so that's pretty much it. We'll hop over to the builder and get started. All right, welcome back to the builder. Hopefully that demo made sense in what we're going to achieve when we're done. So now I'll get started actually building this out for you. Um, Let me just take a moment to explain the process before I show you. So what's going to happen is we are going to create a page in the page builder. That page is going to consist of a bunch of different records, and those records are going to be the titles of our pages. Now, the titles of the pages are not really relevant in this case. What's going to be relevant is that we need the record ID of that particular page record, and we're going to use that in page rules because we want to find out on each individual page. So per page, we're going to run a page rule. We're going to trigger a pipe. That's going to be an API call to our own app. We're going to get the status of a record that we're looking for specifically. And if that status says inactive, then we're going to display the page rule. If the status is active, then the page rule will not be visible. Okay, so let's start off by just adding our like admin kind of security panel page here. So we'll call this page security. And here, what we're going to do is we're just going to change the fields to page name so that we can keep track of this, right? Again, this has nothing to do with the actual page rules themselves. This is only for us to keep track of it. Then we're going to add a select field for page status. And this is going to be inactive. We'll make it red. And active, we'll make it green. Okay, and the next thing we're going to do is a text field for record ID. All right, so there's what we need to do with the record ID field here is we need to populate it with the actual record ID that's behind the scenes in our app. So that's a Tadabase unique identification for every single record in your app. Tables also have their own ID. We'll talk about that in a minute when we do the pipe. But we need the record ID because we need to go find this particular record and check the status of the page status field. So I'm going to just add a random record here right now. This is going to be, I don't know, we'll call this sample page because that's the name of one of the pages in here. And we'll say that this is inactive for now. Okay, so for right now, this record ID is blank. Now there's two different ways that we could populate the record ID. Number one would be with a table rule. So we can say every time a record is created or edited, we can set the record ID text field to record value of record ID. You're going to see that here in parentheses. We could do that, okay? Or let's actually make our page for our page security. And we're going to load the records from the page security table. And we'll include a form here to add new pages to this table. on the form, when we add a new page, we can use record rules to update the record and set the record ID to form value of record ID. Right, so there's two ways that we can do that. So we'll put this one on, and then we'll go add some more pages here. All right, let's say we have another page that's going to be called customers, and we want that one to be inactive by default as well. And how about orders too? Okay, so you can see my record rule here is triggering, and I'm saving that record ID. I'll go back to the builder here for a moment, and we'll just delete the one that we were going to do with the table rule but did not do with the table rule. Okay. We'll go back here, and just because we already have a page called sample page, we'll put that one in as well. All right, great. So this table is actually done. That's all we need. We have the name of the page, again, for our own reference, so we know what page we are restricting in page rules. And we have status, and we have the record ID for this record, okay? Something I wanted to point out about the record ID is that if at any point we edit one of these records, okay, so let's say we edit the sample page record. If you look up in the URL here, at the very end is the record ID. You can see that matches the value that was saved to this text field here. This is the record ID that we want to get for this record. Okay, table ID is held here. So if we look at this entire URL string here, we have build.tadabase.io/apps-manage. This is the app ID, and then data tables, table ID, records, record ID. Okay, so we're going to go and add our pipe now. All right, so this is going to be, actually, no, first we're going to do one more thing. We actually need to create our API key. So settings, API keys, generate a new key, and hit save. Okay, now we have a key, and when we click on this key, we will be able to see the details of this. Okay, so I'm going to copy all of this information off screen into a notepad, and then I'll reference it later. Okay, so I've copied that, and while we're on the topic of copying things that we're going to need, I'm going to go back to the data builder, and I need the table ID for this table because when we run our pipe, the pipe is going to be using the Tadabase REST API, so it's actually going to be communicating from our app to our own app in order to retrieve data. So I'm going to get the table ID because this is the table I want to get a record from, and I'm going to copy that off screen as well. Okay, and then for testing purposes right now, we'll do sample page. I'm going to copy this record ID. That's everything that I need to play around with the pipe that I'm about to install. Again, that was the API key, app ID, app secret, the table ID, and this record ID. All right, so we're going to jump over to pipes, and we're going to search for the Tadabase REST API, and we're going to install that. And inside the pipe, the first place we're going to go to is global parameters. So this is where we're going to store all of our API information. So I'll do this, and then I'll jump back to the other screen. Just a moment. Okay, so I've entered in my API information into global parameters, and I just wanted to make a quick note that after you enter in those three things, the app ID, app key, app secret, you're going to want to make sure you hit save before going back to any other part of this pipe. Okay, so there's many, many different calls that we have available to us here. We are concerned with this one, get a single record. Okay, so if you look at the description, it says sending a GET request to view a single record in a table. All right, so here is the actual endpoint that we're looking at. You can see it's a GET request. We have two parameters in this URL. Okay, the parameters are defined by the curly brackets here. And then in the parameters tab, you can see we have a friendly name for that parameter and the slug. Okay, so the slug matches here, table ID, record ID. But you can see in the slug field within the parameters tab, we do not need the curly brackets. The curly brackets are only for the actual URL. Okay, so that's fine. The default value means that if we don't supply a value to this parameter, then it will have a fallback value. And because we are always going to be referencing the same table, I'm going to paste in my table ID as the default value. So this way I don't even have to include it in my pipe call. Okay, the next thing we need to do is go to test. That's all we need to do. And I'm going to copy and paste in that record ID that I got earlier. And I'm going to hit test. Okay, so this is the API response that we get from the Tadabase REST API. Type success. Okay, that means everything went through just fine. And you can also see status 200. 200 means it was a success. Okay, inside this record, you can see our list of fields. 3 fields that we have, which is the page name, the page status, and the record ID. Additionally, it also returns the record ID itself. And all of these fields are included under this object called item. All right, so what we need to do is we need to map out a response to let Tadabase know that we want to extract the value from field 40, which is our page status field. We want to extract this value. And how we do that is by mapping out this JSON structure. Okay, so we have an object here called item, and inside that object we have these fields. So we need to start by saying, okay, go to the item object, and then we're going to do a dot to indicate that we are selecting a sub item here. Okay, so we're going to look at item dot, and then we're going to do field 40. Item.field40 will return our page status. Okay, now that we have defined a response in here, now obviously there were some responses already mapped out in here. We mapped out our own as a custom response, and now that that's saved, we can use it anywhere that we can run this pipe. Okay, so we're going to go back to the page builder now, and we're going to go to the sample page. This is going to be the one that we want to restrict for this example at least. And we're going to go to the page rules tab at the top and add a new rule. Okay, so we're going to show a message, and this message is going to say this page is currently inactive. And we can choose our message style. Danger error is going to be red. Warning is going to be some sort of like yellow. Info, it's going to depend on the theme of your app, but success is green, and then no style. So we're going to choose danger. This is going to be like a, red is going to say, you can't see this page. Sorry. Okay, the condition. So we're going to use a pipe as a condition, or the value of a pipe, the response from a pipe as a condition. So we can select add new pipe. We only have one pipe installed right now, the Tadabase REST API, so that's enabled by default. And then we're going to choose that get a single record call that we were working with over in the pipe screen. Now the parameters, because we set a default value for the table ID parameter, we do not need to select that. We only need the record ID. And for the custom value, now again, I'm going to paste in the record ID for that before I forget and just hit save. And then I'll finish the rest of this in a moment. Now I'm putting in a custom value of the record ID from here, right? Because I have just kind of arbitrarily decided that this particular record was going to be for the sample page. Okay, so I need to use this record ID. Inside the next screen, right? So first thing we're saying when we run this pipe, and now we can check the pipe value of the pipe stat or page status, and we're going to check whether or not this pipe value is inactive. Okay, so we are looking inside of the table we created. We are finding a record by its ID. We're checking the page status field, and we're checking whether or not that field value is inactive. If that field value is indeed inactive, that serves as our condition for our page rule, and this message is going to show. Okay, I am done with this now. I can save it, and I can go back to the live app. The first thing I'm going to do, or before I do that though, I'm going to give myself the ability to actually edit the page status here. So I'm going to go into the options of this table, and I'm going to turn on inline editing. Okay, so we're on the page security page here, and you can see sample page. It's currently marked as inactive. If I try to go to the sample page, I have this message now displayed. Okay, so what happened when we clicked this link? We clicked sample page. The page rules were, because they're enabled, the page rules ran a pipe. It looked at our table. It says, hey, I'm looking for this record ID. Can you tell me what the status is for page status? The pipe returns. It says this page status field says it's inactive, and that meets the criteria of our page rule in order to display this message. If I go back to page security and I edit this to say active, when I go back to this page, it's now going to be displayed. Okay, that field value of page status now being active doesn't meet the criteria that we had set up in the page rule, and therefore the page is now visible and there's no message shown. Okay, so pretend you were some sort of administrator for an application or something, and you don't want to go back to every single page and like change the page security or disable a page entirely. This can give you a way to actually um, restrict a page from the live app itself. Now, one thing I want everyone to keep in mind who's watching this, we are using the Tadabase REST API to do this. Okay, if you have a very, very busy app with lots of web traffic, lots of users, if you were restricting a page, every single page visit is going to be, actually, this is, sorry, let me back up. This is true for whether the page is restricted or not. Okay, every single page visit, because we have a pipe attached to page rules, that page rule is triggering on every single page visit. That means that every page visit is an API call. So depending on your plan's API limitations and depending on how much traffic your application gets, this could eat up a lot of your API, your daily limits or your calls per minute. Okay, so I just want everyone to keep that in mind, that while this is a pretty cool solution, a pretty cool thing to build, and certainly unique and helpful, it could potentially eat away at your API limits. Okay, so that's my little disclaimer for this, just so everybody is aware. But that's pretty much it. Okay, so we have the ability to change a page status. Now, again, this table has no real bearing or relativity to our actual pages. We are simply just using this as kind of a placeholder to say whether or not this page can be visible. All right. So, anyways, I guess until next week, and thank you for watching Build It with Tim, and we'll see you next time. Take care.